The sharp buzz of the intercom broke the intense silence of Albert's office. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across his cluttered desk filled with architectural plans and sketches. Albert sighed, pressing the talk button with a resigned flick of his wrist. "Yeah, Rita," he asked, his voice flat, tired from a long day of troubleshooting design issues. "There's a gentleman here to see you." Rita's voice came through, slightly hesitant. "He insists it's urgent, says it's about Denise." Albert's heart sank, a familiar worry creasing his forehead. "I thought I said no more appointments today." "He's very insistent, Albert. Says you'll want to hear what he has to say. It's personal, about your wife." Rolling his eyes, Albert pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell him to come back tomorrow, Rita. I'm swamped." "But he says..." "Rita, please, just handle it." Albert cut her off, a touch of irritation in his voice. He wasn't in the mood to deal with whatever this was, not now. There was a brief pause. "Okay, I'll tell him. Sorry to disturb you." The line went dead, and Albert leaned back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. Denise had been distant lately, their conversations reduced to brief exchanges about mundane things. His gut twisted at the thought of another potential rumor or accusation about her. They had been through this cycle more times than he cared to count. As he tried to refocus on the blueprints in front of him, a knock came at his office door, more assertive than Rita's usual taps. Before Albert could respond, the door swung open, and a man strode in tall, with a confident air about him that immediately put Albert on edge. "Who the hell are you?" Albert stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Name's Billy," the man said, ignoring Albert's tone. His gaze was direct, almost challenging, "and I think we need to have a chat about Denise." Albert's jaw clenched. "I don't know what you've heard, but if it's about my wife, I'm not interested in gossip." "It's no gossip," Billy replied, his voice steady. "It's about what's happening to her. What you're doing to her." Albert felt a surge of anger. "Listen, you have no idea what you're talking about. I suggest you leave before I have to call security." Billy took a step closer, his hands in his pockets. "I think I know more than you think, Albert, and I'm not leaving until we clear things up." The room was charged with tension, the afternoon light fading into the shadows that seemed to deepen around them. Albert knew this confrontation was just beginning, and whatever this stranger had to say, it wasn't going to be good. But he stood his ground, ready to defend his marriage, his reputation, whatever it took. Albert sat at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. The early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting lines across the table and onto the floor. Denise moved around the kitchen quietly, her presence like a delicate dance of light and shadows. "You're quiet this morning," Denise said, breaking the silence as she poured herself a cup of coffee. Her voice was soft, almost tentative. Albert looked up, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess. You know, deadlines at the office." Denise nodded, sitting across from him. She sipped her coffee, her eyes searching his face. "Anything I can help with?" He shook his head. "Nah, it's just the usual chaos. Don't worry about it." They fell into silence again, the kind that had become too common lately. Albert's mind drifted back to the early days of their marriage. He remembered how proud he had felt, walking into events with Denise on his arm, her beauty turning heads, her laughter lighting up the room. "You were a stunner at Marcy's wedding, you know," Albert finally said, his tone lighter, trying to bridge the gap between them. "I heard Tom and Jerry both asking about you. They couldn't believe someone as gorgeous as you would even look my way twice." Denise smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "That was a fun night. You were the hero for fixing the DJ's sound system, remember?" "Yeah, hero with a screwdriver," Albert chuckled, then sighed. "But it's not all fun, is it? Having everyone's eyes on you all the time." Denise paused, her expression growing serious. "It can be exhausting, Albert. You know that. Sometimes I feel like people don't see the real me. They just see." This she gestured vaguely towards her face. Albert reached across the table, taking her hand. I see you, Denise. I always have. Denise squeezed his hand, her smile returning, but her eyes remained clouded with unspoken thoughts. And I appreciate that, I really do, but it doesn't stop the whispers, the rumors. Is that happening again? Albert's voice hardened slightly, a protective edge creeping in. Because you know I'll shut them down. Like I always do. Denise withdrew her hand gently, looking away. It's part of the package, isn't it? The beautiful wife and the rumors. I just wish it didn't always lead to. Jealousy, Albert finished for her, his tone a mix of regret and frustration. Denise, I try not to let it get to me, but sometimes it's hard. You know how people talk. I know, and I hate that it affects us, Denise admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I never want you to feel like you can't trust me. Albert stood up, moving behind her chair and resting his hands on her shoulders. I trust you, Denise. It's just everyone else I don't trust. She tilted her head back to look up at him, offering a faint smile. Let's keep trying, okay? For us. Albert nodded, bending down to kiss her forehead. For us, he echoed, but as he straightened up, the worry lines returned to his face. The beauty that had once drawn him to Denise was now a double-edged sword, cutting into the very fabric of their trust. And as he left the kitchen to get ready for work, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. It was a late Thursday evening, and Albert found himself once again in the office of Fred, the private investigator he had reluctantly come to rely on over the past few months. The office was cramped and smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and old coffee. Fred's desk was a chaos of files and old newspapers. So, what's the verdict this time? Fred Albert asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he sat across from the investigator, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Fred leaned back in his chair, eyeing Albert with a sympathetic frown. Albert, I've got to tell you, we've been at this for a while now, and it's always the same story. And that is, Albert prompted, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. She's clean, Albert. We followed her to the nail salon, the gym, her mother's house, coffee with friends. Nothing out of the ordinary. She's just living her life. Fred shuffled through some photographs on his desk, showing them to Albert. They were innocuous, Denise smiling with a friend, carrying shopping bags, chatting on her phone. Albert took the photos, flipping through them with a growing sense of frustration. But there's always whispers, Fred. People talking, looking at me like I'm some kind of fool. Fred sighed, setting his glasses down. Look, Albert, I get it. It's tough. But you hired me to find out if she's stepping out on you, and everything I see points to no. She's charismatic, sure. People are drawn to her. But that doesn't mean she's doing anything wrong. Could they all be in on it? Covering for her, Albert's voice was desperate now, grasping at straws. That's a bit of a stretch. Don't you think? Fred replied, his tone gentle. We've had different teams on this, different times, different contexts. If there was something to find, we would have found it by now. Albert rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of his accusations against his wife. I need to know, Fred. I need to know for sure. Albert, sometimes the thing we're most scared of doesn't exist. We create monsters in our minds, Fred said, handing the photos back to Albert. She's charming, sure, and people love her. Maybe it's just that nothing more sinister. Back at home, Albert watched Denise as she moved around the kitchen, humming a tune, seemingly content. He felt a pang of guilt for doubting her, for the constant surveillance, the constant doubt. Rough day? Denise asked, looking over her shoulder with a concerned smile. Albert hesitated, then decided to be honest. I've been thinking a lot. About us, you, me, this. Suspicion, Albert confessed, his voice low. Denise set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables and wiped her hands on a towel. She walked over to him, her expression serious. Albert, I don't know how many times I can say this, but you have nothing to worry about. I love you. I'm here. With you. Only you. Albert looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deceit. All he saw was warmth, love, and a bit of sadness. I want to believe that, Denise. I'm trying. It's just hard sometimes. Denise took his hands in hers, squeezing them gently. Let's try together, okay? We can go to counseling, talk it out, whatever it takes. I'm committed to this, to us. I hope you know that. Albert nodded, the relief and love mingling with his guilt. I know. I'm in too. All the way. As Denise leaned in to kiss him, Albert felt a shift inside him. Perhaps it was time to start healing, to stop letting unfounded fears dictate the course of their marriage. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to trust in Denise's art of innocence. Albert sat at his desk, flipping through design drafts that no longer seemed to require his full attention. The image of Denise's sincere eyes from their conversation the previous night lingered in his mind, almost convincing him that his fears were groundless. Just as he began to ease into his work, a sharp knock rattled the door, snapping him back to reality. Before he could respond, the door swung open and Billy stormed in. The air around him was charged with aggression, his eyes fixated on Albert with unsettling intensity. Hold up. You can't just barge in here like this. Albert stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. I think I just did. We need to talk about Denise, Billy stated flatly, his stance blocking the doorway. Albert's heart raced, anger mixed with a protective instinct. What about her? And who exactly are you? I'm someone who cares about her more than you ever will. Someone who knows what she's been going through because of you. Billy shot back, his jaw clenched. Albert frowned, confusion and rage battling within him. Listen, buddy. I don't know what you think you know, but you're way out of line. Denise is my wife. That's just it, Albert. She's your wife, but you don't treat her right. You keep her under watch, questioning her loyalty. What kind of life is that? Billy's voice grew louder, his finger pointing accusingly. Albert's hands balled into fists at his sides. You have no idea what you're talking about. My marriage is none of your business. It became my business when Denise started confiding in me. When she told me how trapped she feels, Billy countered, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Albert stepped back, his mind reeling. Denise said that. To you? Yes, to me. Because she couldn't talk to her own husband without being interrogated or doubted. Billy's eyes were ablaze with conviction. Feeling cornered and defensive, Albert shook his head. This is crazy. I don't have to justify my marriage to you. You need to leave. Now. Billy sighed, his expression softening slightly. I came here hoping you'd understand, hoping that maybe you'd see what this is doing to her. But I see that's not going to happen. Albert, despite his anger, felt a pang of doubt. Was there truth to Billy's words? Was his approach to his marriage driving Denise into the arms of another? Look, I love my wife. I've been trying to protect our marriage, Albert said, his voice breaking slightly. Protect? Or control? Billy challenged, his eyes narrowing. Ask yourself that, Albert. The room fell silent, heavy with unspoken thoughts and simmering tension. Finally, Billy turned toward the door. Think about what I said, for her sake. As Billy left, the door closing softly behind him, Albert sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. The confrontation had left him shaken, forcing him to question the very foundations of his marriage. Was he really protecting Denise, or was he smothering her with his insecurities? Oh, now, Albert buried his face in his hands, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. He had to find out the truth, not just from spies or second-hand information, but directly from Denise. It was time for a frank, open conversation with his wife, a conversation that might just determine the future of their marriage. Albert's workday stretched late into the evening, a feeble attempt to bury his anxieties in the mountain of paperwork that awaited him after his unsettling confrontation with Billy. However, as the office emptied and the glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows across his plans, his thoughts kept returning to Denise and the accusations Billy had thrown at him. Finally giving in to the exhaustion and emotional turmoil, Albert packed up his things and headed to the parking lot, the weight of the day heavy on his shoulders. As he approached his car, he noticed a figure leaning against the hood, a silhouette sharpened by the dim streetlight overhead. Billy, Albert called out, his voice echoing slightly in the nearly empty lot. What are you doing here? I thought we were done talking. Billy pushed off from the car, stepping into the light. His face was hard, determined. We're not done until you hear me out. You need to know what's really going on with Denise. Albert sighed, feeling a rush of irritation. Look, I'm really not in the mood for more accusations. I've had enough for one day. Billy shook his head, his expression grim. It's not just accusations, Albert. I'm telling you, Denise is hurting and you're the cause. You're driving her away. Albert's patience snapped. And you think you can just waltz in and play the hero? You don't know anything about our relationship. I know what I see, and I know what she tells me. That's enough. Billy stepped closer, his voice intensifying. She's been trying to reach out to you, to explain her side, but you're too caught up in your own insecurities. Frustrated and feeling cornered, Albert retorted, and you think undermining our marriage is helping? You're just making things worse for all of us. Billy's face softened slightly, the anger giving way to a plea. I'm not trying to undermine anything. I just want her to be happy, even if it means it's not with you. Can you say the same? Can you let her be happy? The question hit Albert harder than he expected. He faltered, his anger cooling into a confused fear. I do want her to be happy. I love her. Then start showing it in ways that mattered to her. Billy's voice was calmer now, almost compassionate. Listen to her, really listen. Don't just assume you know best. Albert looked away, his mind racing. Was he really so blinded by his own fears that he couldn't see the damage he was causing? I'll think about what you said, Albert muttered, more to himself than to Billy. Billy nodded, stepping back. I hope you do, for both your sakes. With a final glance, Billy turned and walked away, leaving Albert by his car, enveloped in the quiet of the night. Albert leaned against his car, the cool metal grounding him as he took in the heavy silence. As he drove home, the streets blurred past him, each stoplight a moment to pause and reflect. The clash with Billy had opened a chasm of self-doubt, but it also sparked a faint hope. Maybe it wasn't too late to mend things with Denise. Maybe he could learn to trust again, to rebuild the intimacy they had once cherished. Arriving home, Albert knew one thing for sure: he needed to have that honest, open conversation with Denise. No accusations, no detectives, just the two of them, face to face, heart to heart. It was time to confront not just the possible cracks in their marriage, but the walls he had built around himself. Albert arrived home, the night's conversation with Billy echoing in his ears. His heart felt heavy as he parked his car and walked up the path to the front door, the familiar lights of his home now casting an unfamiliar glow. With each step, his resolve to clear the air with Denise grew stronger. He found Denise in the living room, curled up with a book, the soft lamp light illuminating her face. She looked up as he entered, her expression changing from relaxation to concern upon seeing his troubled face. Albert, what's wrong? You look upset, Denise asked, setting her book aside as she stood to meet him. Albert took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly. We need to talk. It's important. Denise's brow furrowed, a hint of worry crossing her features. Of course, let's sit down. What's going on? They sat on the couch, facing each other. Albert hesitated, the words he had rehearsed suddenly feeling inadequate. I met someone today who claimed to be very close to you. He made some accusations, Denise. About us, about me. Denise's eyes widened in surprise. Who? What did they say? His name is Billy. He says you've been unhappy, feeling trapped because of me. He says I'm hurting you. Albert's voice broke slightly with the weight of the words. Denise sighed, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. I didn't expect you to find out this way. Albert's heart sank. So, it's true? You feel trapped? Denise reached out, taking his hands in hers. Albert, I've been feeling overwhelmed. Yes, but it's not just you, it's everything. The way we communicate, how we've been handling things, it's not working. But I didn't know how to tell you without hurting you. Albert felt a mixture of relief and despair. Why didn't you just talk to me, Denise? I tried, but every time we talked, it turned into an argument or you shutting down. I felt so alone, Albert. That's when I started talking to Billy, as a friend. He listened when I felt like you couldn't. Albert nodded, struggling to process everything. I've been so scared of losing you, of being made a fool, that I might have pushed you further away. I'm sorry, Denise. I really am. Denise squeezed his hands, her eyes tearful. I'm sorry too. I never meant for any of this to go so far. The air between them felt charged as they both let down their guards. What did Billy tell you exactly? Albert asked, needing to know the full extent of the situation. He saw how down I was, and he offered a sympathetic ear. I think he might have taken things too far in what he told you, but it was from a place of concern, Denise explained. Albert felt a pang of jealousy but pushed it aside. I understand. I might not like it, but I get it. So what happens now? Where do we go from here? Denise looked at him, her expression earnest. I want us to try again, Albert, but we need help. We can't keep going in circles like this. I agree. Let's get some help. Counseling, anything. I don't want to lose you, Denise. Not over this. Not over my fears, Albert said, the honesty in his voice more palpable than ever. Denise nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. I don't want to lose you either. Let's fix this, together. They embraced, a silent pledge passing between them to mend the fractures in their marriage. The truth had been harsh but necessary, unveiling the raw vulnerabilities they had both tried to hide. Now, with everything out in the open, they could finally begin the journey of healing, together. The next morning found Albert walking into a local coffee shop, the crisp air clearing his mind and firming his resolve. He spotted Billy sitting at a corner table, his posture tense, eyes scanning the entrance until they landed on Albert. Billy stood as Albert approached, his expression uncertain. Albert, thanks for meeting me. I wasn't sure you'd come after everything. Albert nodded, his demeanor calm. I needed to think about everything you said, and after a long talk with Denise, I realized you were trying to help. In your own way. I'm here to clear the air. They both sat, the early morning buzz of the coffee shop providing a neutral backdrop to their conversation. I want to apologize for coming on so strong, Billy started, his voice sincere. I care a lot about Denise. When she told me how things were between you two, I guess I felt like I had to do something. Albert sighed, taking a moment before replying. I get it, and I'm sorry for how I reacted. It's been tough, grappling with my own insecurities. But I want to make things right with Denise. She mentioned you two are just friends. That's right, Billy confirmed, a hint of relief in his eyes. Just friends. I might have overstepped in my concern for her, but I never wanted to come between a marriage. There was a pause as Albert processed this. Then he offered a small, tentative smile. Denise and I decided to start counseling. We're trying to work through our issues. I appreciate what you did, in a way. It pushed us to confront some needed truths. That's good to hear, man. Really, Billy looked genuinely pleased, his shoulders relaxing. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. Albert thought for a moment, then said, actually, there is something. Denise and I would appreciate it if you could give us some space while we're working on our marriage. It's going to be a sensitive time for both of us. Of course, I understand completely, Billy agreed quickly. You won't have any trouble from me. And Albert continued, feeling a new sense of clarity, if we could keep this situation as discreet as possible. For Denise's sake and ours. Billy nodded. You have my word. No one else needs to know more than they already do. They both stood, and Albert extended his hand, a gesture of truce and newfound respect. Billy shook it firmly. Thank you, Billy. For everything. Thank you, Albert, for listening and for understanding. I wish the best for you and Denise. As they parted ways, Albert felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. The alliance formed with Billy wasn't just about keeping peace, it was a mutual understanding and a shared commitment to support Denise's happiness, albeit from different perspectives. Walking back to his car, Albert felt more hopeful about the future than he had in months. With a plan in place and a new ally in understanding, he was ready to face the challenges ahead with a renewed spirit and an open heart. The day Albert had dreaded yet deemed necessary had finally arrived. He sat in the sterile, somber courtroom, his hands folded in his lap, each second ticking by with palpable tension. Denise sat a few seats away, her posture rigid, her face a mask of stoic resignation. As the judge entered, everyone rose in unison, the formality of the moment weighing heavily in the air. They sat as the judge gestured for them to do so, and the proceedings began. Albert's lawyer stood, adjusting his suit before addressing the court. Your Honor, we are here today to address the matters concerning the marriage of my client, Mr. Albert Richards, and Mrs. Denise Richards. It is with regret that we seek a dissolution of their marriage, under grounds that will be discussed. His voice was clear and professional. Denise's lawyer rose, offering a nod towards Albert's lawyer. Your Honor, Mrs. Richards acknowledges the unfortunate breakdown of their marriage. However, she disputes any insinuations of misconduct and asks for a fair consideration of all facts. The judge nodded, looking over her glasses. Proceed. Albert watched, heart pounding, as his lawyer presented the evidence they had compiled. Photographs, messages, and testimonies from various sources painted a picture of the distance and miscommunication that had plagued their marriage. His lawyer was careful, however, to maintain a respectful tone, focusing on the facts without casting unnecessary blame. Then it was Denise's turn. Her lawyer emphasized her commitment to the marriage and her efforts to bridge the gap between them, highlighting her willingness to enter counseling and work on their issues. Denise herself spoke softly but firmly, expressing her deep regret over the misunderstandings and the private matters being dragged into public view. Albert listened, his throat tight with emotion. When he was asked to speak, he stood, his legs slightly unsteady. Your Honor, I never wanted things to come to this. Denise and we lost our way. But it wasn't all her fault or mine. It's just. Sometimes things don't work out, despite the best intentions. His voice was earnest, filled with a sadness that echoed around the quiet room. The judge listened intently, making notes. Mr. Richards, do you believe there is no chance of reconciliation? Albert paused, his eyes meeting Denise's for a moment. I believe we've tried. We really have. It's just better for both of us to move forward, separately. The proceedings continued with a few more exchanges, legal formalities that felt surreal to Albert. Finally, the judge made her decision, granting the dissolution of marriage, with equitable distribution of assets and no faults assigned to either party. As the final gavel sounded, Albert felt a mix of relief and profound sorrow. He and Denise stood, and for a moment, their eyes met again. There was no anger, no bitterness, just mutual sadness and understanding. Outside the courtroom, Denise approached Albert. I'm sorry for everything, she said quietly. Me too, Albert replied, his voice thick. I hope you find happiness, Denise. I hope the same for you, Albert. They parted then, walking away from the courtroom and from a shared life that was no longer theirs. In the end, the court day reaffirmed the painful truth that some things, once broken, can't be completely mended, but it also brought a sense of closure and a chance for new beginnings. Albert knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it, hopeful about rediscovering peace and perhaps, eventually, happiness. Months had passed since the courtroom had declared the end of Albert and Denise's marriage. Autumn had turned into a crisp, colourful winter, with the first snowfalls blanketing the city in white. Albert found himself at his favourite park bench, a place he often came to think and watch the world go by. Wrapped in a thick coat, he sipped his coffee and looked out at the frozen pond where children skated, their laughter echoing through the cold air. He smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't known in a long time. Mind if I join you? A familiar voice asked. Albert looked up to see Billy, his breath visible in the chilly air. Not at all, Albert replied, gesturing to the seat next to him. How have you been? Good, Billy said as he sat down, hands tucked into his pockets. And you? How are you holding up? I'm doing okay, Albert admitted, turning his gaze back to the pond. It's been tough, but I think I'm finally starting to move forward. That's good to hear, Albert. Really good. Billy paused, watching the skaters. You know, I never thanked you properly for how things ended. For being fair, despite everything. Albert nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. It was the right thing to do. We both lost something, but I think we also gained something too. A chance to start over. Yeah. A new beginning, Billy agreed, then looked at Albert. How's that going, by the way? The new beginning. Albert shrugged, a thoughtful look crossing his face. It's a day-by-day thing. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting. I'm trying to learn from the past, not just run from it. That's all we can do, right? Learn and keep moving. Billy glanced around the park, his expression contemplative. You ever think about dating again? Albert laughed softly, shaking his head. Not yet. I'm just enjoying the peace, the simplicity of life right now. But who knows? Maybe someday soon. It'll happen when you're ready. No rush, Billy stood, ready to leave. I should get going. But let's catch up again soon, yeah? Definitely, Albert said, standing as well. Thanks for stopping by, Billy. As Billy walked away, Albert sat back down, his mind filled with thoughts of the future. The past months had been a journey of self-discovery, of painful admissions, and slow healing. He realized that while the divorce had closed a chapter of his life, it had also opened another. Looking out at the bright winter day, Albert felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was free to redefine his life, to pursue happiness in ways he hadn't considered before. The pain of the past still lingered, but it was no longer a chain that held him back. Instead, it was a lesson that guided him toward a future filled with possibilities. As the children continued to skate, their joy unrestrained, Albert felt a smile spread across his face. This was what a new beginning looked like, a clear horizon, ready for the first steps of a new journey. And for the first time in a long while, he was truly ready to take them. Let us know in the comments how this story has inspired you, or share your own experiences of overcoming adversity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories like this one. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest uploads. Your journey through the complexities of the human heart starts now. Remember, your story isn't over yet. It's just a new chapter beginning. Stay strong, stay inspired.